Welcome back to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Gonna have a solo show, looks like today. Kip is on the recovery mode. Had to go take care of some things today. May have Rusty Mansell pop on as we get going. I know he's got some high school football stuff to take care of this week with championship week finally upon us in Georgia high school football. So looks like it's going to be me for at least the start of this episode. And a lot to talk about. I was kind of running through the list of topics and things to discuss on today's episode. And let's just start at the top with the big news. We are coming to you live on Tuesday afternoon. But the big news around Georgia football this week came on Monday night with the news that Stetson Bennett is a Heisman Trophy finalist. He's one of 4 finalists for this year's award. He becomes the first Georgia finalist for the Heisman since Garrison Hearst in the early 90s. Gotta say, I was a little surprised. Not to say that I don't think Stetson is very much worthy or very much deserving of this kind of honor. But it seemed like, through the end of the regular season, the attention might have kind of came off Stetson a little bit. Kentucky game, his numbers weren't crazy. He had an interception. Georgia Tech game was so-so, nothing too wild. And then, he puts together a really good performance in the LSU game. And I think what has really propelled Stetson to being one of 4 people who could walk away with the Heisman Trophy in New York on Saturday night is the fact that he has come up clutch in so many big games. He was the MVP of that game against LSU on Saturday, which we'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes. But obviously, his play in the playoffs last year, his play in the Oregon game to start this season, his play against Tennessee. People can pick through the stats and say his numbers aren't quite as good, but look at the games that Georgia really needed him. And also keep in mind, too, in the fourth quarter of so many games this season, they really took the throttle off and Stetson didn't throw the ball a lot, which made sense. There was no reason in some of those games Georgia won to continue throwing the ball around the park and trying to just pad stat, and stuff your numbers and try to make things look nice. Because at the end of the day, as much as I'm sure Kirby Smart and that whole coaching staff wants Stetson to get these individual awards, it's not about that. And I don't think Stetson would say it's about that either. If you read the statement that Georgia put out from Stetson, you could tell he was really surprised that he didn't expect to be a Heisman Trophy finalist. He said, paraphrasing off the top of my head, but his quote was something like, "I never thought about the Heisman. I just wanted to play football. I just wanted to play quarterback at Georgia." I don't know that there's anyone more deserving than Stetson Bennett. From what I can tell, he is only the second former walk-on to be a Heisman finalist. As far as I know, the only other one was Baker Mayfield, and Baker won the award after being nominated and being a finalist. So, it was a big Monday for Stetson. He is a Heisman finalist. He wins the Burlsworth Award, which is given to a college football player who was at one time in his career a walk-on. And I would really encourage anyone who missed that to go watch Stetson's speech. Also, you can see I wrote a story about it, just kind of detailing everything he said. Very good speech by Stetson. You could tell that he was humbled by the award and talking about the origin of the award and what it meant and having the opportunity to take home that trophy. A trophy that he was up for last year, and honestly, I was a little surprised he didn't win it then. But definitely a really special start of a week for Stetson. And I'll say this too for everybody watching. I'm going to be in New York. We've made the plans to go up there to cover the ceremony with Stetson being there, and very interested in seeing what we get to hear from Stetson and the other finalists as well. Should be a very exciting time. Again, this is the first time in my lifetime that a Georgia player has been a Heisman Trophy finalist. I'm sorry if that makes some of the people listening feel old, but this is something that does not happen often, and people are going to nitpick it, and some people don't think that Stetson should have been up there, but the fact of the matter is he is, and I think it's something to celebrate for former walk-on, a guy who's been through a lot, a guy who left Georgia and came back. I would have to imagine, and something I'm really interested in hearing from Stetson is, when he was debating coming back after winning the national title, surely there was never thought that, well, I could come back and eventually win the Heisman. I mean, I still think for a guy like Stetson, the ultimate goal is to lead Georgia to another national championship and go back to back. But having a shot at the Heisman, that's pretty special too. Would be remiss not to bring up some of the news that came out this morning, some reports about a former Georgia quarterback, JT Daniels. It looks like he's going back in the portal, spent the 2022 season at West Virginia, and things didn't go very well. He plays 10 games. He gets benched at the end of the year. I think that it's going to be very interesting to see what JT does. This is pure speculation on my part. I don't expect he would come back to Georgia, but maybe a school like Missouri, which was very much in the running for him last spring when he was trying to decide where he was going next. I think that would make sense for him, or maybe he goes to like a group of five, or maybe he goes somewhere like South Florida, or maybe what looks like a starting over at Liberty or one of the group of five schools. Too early to tell for sure, JT, but hoping just for his sake that this next chapter treats him well, because, from everything we saw when he was leaving Georgia, he did everything the right way. And from what we could tell, his teammates liked him, and hoping the best for him going forward. Speaking of the transfer portal, kind of a slow start. We are talking, making sure to read the timestamp because this could very well change at any moment. It is 12:12 on Tuesday afternoon. So far, no Georgia players have entered the portal. I don't expect that to remain the case, though I don't know when exactly guys are going to enter. Just based on what I know and based on what I've heard, I'm not expecting any crazy entries from Georgia. I think it's very much going to be what you would anticipate: reserve guys hoping to play more going forward, guys who are looking for a second chance elsewhere. So we'll see when that happens. I don't know exactly, and it's entirely feasible that these guys do stay through as far as Georgia goes in the playoff, whether that is just the semifinals or if they go on and play in the national championship game, because there's still a few days after the national title game. But I would expect somebody, probably multiple go in before we get to that point, and before Georgia plays Ohio State. On the other side, looking at Georgia and what they are going to try to go get, I think it's very clear from the first couple of days that they want to add depth at receiver. And right now, the biggest name that we've heard is Ra Thomas. He's a guy that played at Mississippi State. You follow Alabama product, a guy that's really talented, led Mississippi State in receiving yards this season. It's not clear at this point where he's leaning. Again, he's from Alabama. Got a lot of offers yesterday: Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, Oklahoma. Georgia is not going to be alone in that recruitment, but I do think that, it's going to be something that Georgia goes after hard. He is going to be someone that Georgia really wants, and they understand that they want to add experience to a receiving room that right now they have some talented true freshmen that'll be coming in for the 2023 team, but they do need experience. So Ra Thomas is the guy that we're looking at this point, but I wouldn't be surprised if we hear some buzz about a few other guys, and to keep an eye on that, because again, super early, still not really clear what the roster is going to look like as far as numbers, because us on the outside are sure who all's leaving and what that's going to look like. But something you can keep an eye on. I've made a story on our board that is tracking all the roster movement right now. Again, slow start as far as nobody leaving at this point, no one entering the portal from Georgia, but I do anticipate that'll change eventually. A lot to cover on this episode. I'll get into what's been sort of the other phase of the last few days, and that's been recruiting. Georgia picks up 2 new commitments: 5-star edge Samuel Mpemba, and then that was on Sunday. And on Monday, Georgia flips 3-star offensive tackle Jamal Merriweather, who was a UCF commit. And, Merriweather was a guy that I'll be honest and say I did not know very much about. Him being from Brunswick, which Georgia has had pretty good success as far as getting guys from that area and from that high school. I'll be interested with Georgia landing Merriweather if that means that we will see departure from the offensive line, which I don't think is going to be dire as far as reserve guys going in. Georgia had a ton of scholarship offensive linemen coming into 2022, and for the most part, even going back to the spring, didn't lose a ton of them. Owen Condon, Clay Webb, being a few of those guys. So I do think that kind of shows Georgia's hand right now. I think that that's going to be something to watch and something to keep an eye on as far as if that kind of tipped Georgia's hand. Couple questions in our group. Update on Ladd McConkey. Kirby talked about that after the SEC championship game. Said that it was just a continuation of injuries that Ladd's been playing with. His knees were bothering him. I don't think it's anything to be worried about, particularly with the amount of time Georgia's going to have having 3+ weeks to recover. I don't think Ladd is something to be concerned with. Jamel Major asked, Bill Norton is in the portal, right? Not yet. That has been a name. I know Rusty Mansell has thrown out there on our board a guy to watch, but at this point, there is no Georgia player officially in the portal. There are a few names that we are watching and guys we anticipate will go into the portal. But as of, again, I'm giving timestamps because this thing is changing by the minute, and it can, especially if you've seen any of the other teams. There has been a lot of movement through these first couple of days. But at this point, no Georgia player is officially in the portal, nor has anyone announced that is going to happen. Also want to make sure I talked a little bit about Jamal Merriweather. Samuel Mpemba, I think that it is easy to lose sight because of what Georgia's already gotten. This guy is super talented. He's a guy that I think looked really good at IMG Academy, where he was getting plenty of recruitment from fellow Georgia commitment Gabriel Harris. I think he was in Samuel's ear a good bit, which I don't know if that was necessarily needed. But very talented guy. Edge is going to be an outside linebacker, is going to be a very important position for Georgia. And it's another one, too. I am curious, talked about receiver in the portal, if Georgia tries to get some more experience outside linebackers. You're losing Nolan Smith. You're losing Robert Bill. You could use more depth even with some of these talented freshmen they got because, it's going to take these guys a while, as talented as they are, to get up to speed and be guys you can count on to play considerable reps because to Georgia's credit, there are going to be a few other options already on the roster. Chaz Chambliss, MJ Sherman, Walker has played some inside and outside linebacker. They have a few guys that they can lean on. Marvin Jones Jr. is coming back from injury. Darius Smith, another true freshman. But I would not be surprised if they look at outside linebacker and try to shore up that position, get a little bit more experience before 2023. So we're going to take a quick break, come back, try to talk about whatever else is going on right now, and also talk a little bit about Georgia-Ohio State, although that we're going to have so many podcasts about that going forward. But I will give you just sort of my initial thoughts on that. Welcome back, everybody. Well, I talked about this on Sunday shortly after the college football playoff was announced, but I thought the committee got it right as far as 1 through 4, and I thought that the committee set up the matchups the way it needed to be. I know some people thought that maybe that the committee specifically separated Ohio State and Michigan, did not want the game rematch in the playoff and in the semifinals. I didn't necessarily feel that way. I thought that TCU still deserved number 3 after losing in overtime to number 10 Kansas State, compared to Ohio State just getting blasted by Michigan in that season finale that they had. So looking at this game, this is sort of the talking point I've had to this point in the year and to this point in the postseason, I should say, the last few days. 2 things that Ohio State will have to do to have a chance against Georgia. It's match Georgia's physicality and it's make plays in the passing game. I think the second option is very well possible, although I will say I don't think people need to overlook the loss of Jackson Smith and Jigba. Huge loss for Ohio State. He has decided he's going to focus on the NFL draft. He is not playing in the playoffs. A huge blow, even though he has been banged up. It's going to be something to understand. He is not the entire Ohio State offense as far as the passing game, the receivers. Marvin Harrison Jr., very gifted receiver. C.J. Stroud obviously also has a chance to win the Heisman. It's going to be something that Georgia has got to straighten up in the secondary. I think they gave up 502 passing yards against LSU. Definitely an area of concern. Keely Ringo, I thought, kind of struggled, and he's a guy that's had an up and down 2022. Credit to Keely. He's had some big moments, played well in the Tennessee game, and had a huge pick. But I think that if you look at that LSU game, the number of times the guy he was covering was targeted, they were going after Keely, and I thought he struggled. So he's a guy that, I think, having said that, I don't think you can lose sight of the fact that Georgia has more time to prepare for this game, that this game is not this Saturday. They have until New Year's Eve and, in the days leading up to it to get ready to play this Ohio State team. I do think that's going to work wonders, and I think that is going to help Georgia, and I do think that it helps Georgia that a lot of the time these guys really get up for these big games, and there's not going to be a game bigger than this. And I'll say this too for everybody listening on the podcast, give you guys a little nugget. I had talked to some people on the Ohio State side, and, I think making the playoff was kind of like whiplash for some of those players. I think that there were people who were basically going through practice, what would have been the week of conference championship week, kind of looking at each other like, well, what are we doing here? Like we're not going to make the playoff. And then USC loses, and you have that craziness Friday night in the Pac-12 championship game, and all of a sudden State gets right back in it. Now, it does help Ohio State that they have no shortage of time to kind of zone in and get settled back in. But, I do think that kind of mentality might be a factor, that Ohio State has to sort of shake off the thought that the season's over and we can kind of just coast through. And some of us may play in a bowl game and others might not. And all of a sudden, hey, we're back playing for a championship. So they do have time on their side as far as that goes. But I did think that was pretty interesting to think about the fact that, they were kind of easing their way through, it sounded like. And then all of a sudden it was time to get back and get back to go time. Other things to talk about with that would be my second factor, and that's the physicality. And that's where I think Georgia's going to be in good shape as far as when this game is played. And I'll say, too, we'll have plenty of podcasts really breaking down Ohio State in depth, have some of the guys from the Ohio State 247 site on and talk to them and really pick their brains. But, you go back, and my plan is to try to do a what stood out and, what stood out on the rewatch story from the game, from the Michigan-Ohio State game, on top of also doing one for Georgia-LSU. I just think that Michigan pushed Ohio State around. And, I think if you compare Georgia and Michigan, they're not identical. I think that would be foolish to say so. But that kind of physicality and hit you in the mouth mentality, I do think that both those teams share that. And we see that something Ohio State struggled with. Close first half, and Michigan really wore them down. I think that this Ohio State team is going to be very capable of making plays and is going to be in a position to throw the ball well, and C.J. Stroud can make plays. But I just think line of scrimmage, I think Georgia's going to be in good shape. And I think that looking at this game, we're still a few weeks away, so I kind of give myself the out of saying I can learn more and maybe change this pick or adjust this pick. But right now I'm saying Georgia 42, Ohio State 30. I think Georgia is going to have far too much on offense. I think their defense is going to push Ohio State around, especially up front. I think Georgia wins by 12. But again, a few weeks to go, we'll see how things are going and get more intel on both sides and sort of decide it from there. Other news and notes: on Monday, All SEC was released from the Associated Press. 9 Georgia players get on there. No Stetson Bennett, which I know a lot of people saw that, and it kind of caught their eye, which when you have Bryce Young and Hendon Hooker, that definitely complicates things. But, it's sort of the weird debate is, Hendon being on there but not getting the Heisman invite, and Stetson getting the Heisman invite but not only all SEC. I believe the coaches SEC should come out sometime today. It may actually be at 1, so that's something to watch out for. Besides that, I was kind of surprised Cedric Van Pran wasn't first team all SEC center, but gets second team, and he's a guy that is going to laugh all the way to the bank because of how he's played and his future in the NFL for sure. Other than that, trying to think of the other stuff that's been going on. Be watching today. I think it might be in about 30 minutes as we talk live, 1 o'clock Eastern time on Tuesday. The Broyles Award is going to be announced, and Todd Monken is one of the finalists for that. We will see if he winds up taking home that award. Done an excellent job in his 3rd season at Georgia. Very deserving. Even if he winds up just being a finalist, he's done an excellent job. No, Bronco Nagurski was announced last night. Will Anderson wins that. Chris Smith was a finalist. So no shortage of things to talk about this week. No shortage of news, and no shortage of stories to write, because it's no football. You kind of think, all right, it might be a little bit slower, and it has very much not been the case. But that's why we do what we do, and that's why we love having you guys on to read it and to comment and let us know what you think. So before we get out of here, before I wrap up this episode, want to do the men's basketball minute. Georgia men's basketball is 7-2. They beat Florida A&M on Friday night. Shorthanded, had to play without 4 guys, but they take care of business. As you listen to this, as we are recording this, is Tuesday afternoon. Tuesday at 7 p.m., they go to Atlanta to play Georgia Tech. I think it's a game Georgia can win. I do think if Georgia's shorthanded, that's going to hurt things. They didn't have Frank Anselm at practice on Tuesday. They've had to go without Terry Roberts, who's been sick. Cario Oquendo still dealing with an ankle, and M.A. Moncrief has been dealing with a knee. So they've been shorthanded, and that's not going to help matters if they have to be when they go to Atlanta tonight. But I think this is a very beatable Georgia Tech team, a Georgia Tech team that finished last in the ACC last year. Georgia could really use this win. Going on the road, they were already 0-1 against ACC teams on the road this year. They played Wake Forest early in the season and wound up losing that game in the second game of the season for Mike White. So something to watch there. Very intriguing, and I think a very revealing few weeks coming up for Georgia. They play Georgia Tech on Tuesday. 12 days later, I think that 12 days later they're going to be back in Atlanta playing Notre Dame. I think that these 2 games are going to be very revealing when it comes to this year's Georgia team. Again, before the season, I said they finished just under 500, 15-16. They've got to take advantage of some of these non-conference games, and both these Georgia Tech Notre Dame games, I think they're very much measuring sticks for this team, and sort of the expectations before we start SEC play on January 4th. So we're going to wrap up this solo episode. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. Appreciate everybody for listening. Everybody who watched this live and everyone who's listening to it after the fact, we appreciate your support. Want to make sure and say that we have a 50% off VIP deal going on right now at Dogs 247. Take advantage of it. As I tweeted out, there's never been a better time to be a Georgia Bulldog, and there's never been a better time to be a Dogs 247 subscriber. So much intel, so much to keep up with, not only with the transfer portal, not only with the college football play a few weeks away, but also early signing day is going to be here December 21st. So there's going to be all kinds of movement there and all kinds of stuff to talk about as we start moving forward. So I'll wrap it up there. Appreciate everybody for watching, everybody for listening. Appreciate all the support, and continue to read all the content, because I'm sure as soon as I get off this, probably going to write 3 or 4 more stories. So until next time, take care, everybody.